Hello, this is Robert Gillespie signing in from Mr. Nahal Abdallah's Anatomy Physiology class 165, I believe. I5, section I5. Anyway, here I am going to present to you today on the different parts of the skull. So, I have two skulls with me. This is actually one my wife produced back in college. I find that it is better in many ways than in comparison to the skull from our dummy right here. Say hi, dummy. Except for his has a mandible. Here is my list of pieces of the skull that I will be presenting. As you can see, there's no pictures, sadly. It is sitting on top of my computer, and if I can get it back on, then we can begin. So we start off with the frontal bone. This is also my stick pointer. I decided to carve my own because I thought it looked better than what was included in the lab pack. Also, you notice the fine black tip. Pretty cool, pretty cool. Anyways, markers, wonders. We have the frontal bone. We have the parietal bones. Two parietal bones. We have the temporal bone. Temporal bone, come to me, temporal bone. Here we go. We have the temporal bones. Then we have the coronal suture, which goes along the top. As you can see, my wife's skull even has the different sutures involved. So here's the coronal suture. We have the sagittal suture, which goes along the top. You can see that up close. Isn't that pretty? And we have the squamous suture, which is also very distinct on this skull. We have the lamboid suture, which is the one connecting connecting on the back for the occipital button. So then, after that, we move on to the nasal bone. It's an easy one. Nasal bone, nasal bone. Then we have the maxilla bone. How exciting is that? Where's the maxilla bone? Here's the maxilla bone. Say hi, maxilla bone. It has sections for teeth. Nice as that. And then we move on to the mandible. Obviously, this was not a skull. It was more, wherefore art thou type skull. No mandible, in other words. Here, we have the mandible. Nice mandible. So then we have the mental foramen. Those little dots. Hard to see. Hard to see. Little dots, the mental foramen. And then we have the mandibular ramus. Mandibular ramus. Pretty cool. We have the mandibular notch. This is where we start to get difficult. Not where we finish getting difficult. The mandibular notch, mandibular condyle. Let me see. Mandibular condyle. And then we have the coronoid process of the mandible. Coronoid process. And then we have the zygomatic bone. Where's the zygomatic bone? Here's the zygomatic arch. How exciting. Zygomatic arch. Moving to the zygomatic bone. Right in here. So we have two of them, obviously. Sphenoid bone. Let's find the sphenoid bone. Here's the lateral view of the sphenoid bone. He sits right in there. And then we move on to the ethmoid bone. Okay, so this guy does not show the ethmoid bone, so we're going to move on. Back to Wherefore Art Thou, or I Knew Him Well. Alas, Poor York, I Knew Him Well. There we go. Here's Poor York, so we'll call him York. So let's get into the nose, shall we? Dig into York's nose. So we have the ethmoid bone up top here, and then below that we have the vomer bone. Skipping ahead a little bit on the list, but the vomer bone is in there. So then we have the lacrimal bone. Lacrimate means tearing, so that would be, my wife's skull even has the lacrimal bone somewhat drawn out, as good as any. So then we go the supraorbital foramen. Supra is above, right? Supraorbital foramen. Oh, come on, it's hard to. It's going to be a dot above. See if it shows it on the other skull. Yeah, there's a little dot. That's a little better. So we have the supraorbital foramen. We have the infraorbital foramen, which is another good dot. And then we have the supraorbital fissure and the inferior orbital fissure. Well, those are actually shown better on Poor York. So we have the supraorbital fissure, and let's see if I can get them in there. And as you can see, the inferior orbital fissure shown better here. And then we have the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone. Okay, this isn't really shown well in either skull, but let's, oh wait, perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone. That is actually, see, we did the ethmoid earlier, so here it is. This is the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone. The ethmoid bone is actually flat and travels back into the nose, giving us the nasal septum. But the perpendicular plate is the beginning, shown much better on my wife's Poor York. So now we move on to the middle and inferior conch. Okay, the conches are actually shown better on the other skull, but really hard to maneuver to. So let's see if we can do it. As you can see in there, we have the middle and inferior. There's actually a middle and then inferiors below it. There's a one above. There's a third one that's above all of those two, but it is not requested, so I'll let you guess as to the name. We have the anterior nasal spine, which I like on Poor York. Here is the anterior nasal spine. It is very easy to see on Mr. Poor York. So then we have the external auditory meatus, shown better on the little skull, but not wonderfully either way. This is really the ear canal, and the beginning of the ear canal at that. So then we move into the glabella. Isn't that just fun to say? Glabella. It's almost like you want to name your child that, but anyways, glabella. Here is the glabella. It is between the eyebrows and above the nose. So then we move to the greater and lesser wings of the sphenoid bone, which these are fun and hard to show on either skull as well. So we have the greater wing of the sphenoid, which is going to be, come on, in here. And then the lesser wing is actually going to be on the inside, kind of across from the greater wing. And just for fun, let's do a little extra credit, just make sure I covered them all. We also have the optic canal. Optic canal is not shown well in either skull, but the optic canal is kind of is formed from the lesser sphenoid right in this area, and the lesser sphenoid kind of loops around. I hope I'm explaining it well, and makes the optic canal. So that tops me out at hopefully 30 or 31 different parts of the skull. And so that should do it for my assignment. Thank you, thank you, teacher, for your patience, and I hope you have a lovely day. Goodbye.